Okay.
Sorry about that, folks.
Thank you so much for your patience. So now we can go over the webinar logistics. So the participants will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. The materials for today's webinar will be in the handouts pane. So there, if you look in the handout section, there is the presentation from today, the application for the SPI navigators, and just a brief overview of what the Florida Pathways Institute is. And then there is a section to submit questions if you have them throughout the webinar, so please don't hesitate to ask them. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A portion to answer those questions. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Abby, and she'll do an overview of the agenda.
All right, thank you, Katora. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for bearing with us. There are always fun technical issues with webinar technology. But just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, I would first like to give an overview of what the Florida Pathways Institute is. I'm sure many of you on the call are familiar, but just to make sure we're all on the same page of what the Pathways Institute is, and then we'll move into the specific role of the navigators and what they will add to the Florida Pathways Institute. And then we'll wrap up with a question and answer session. You do have the ability to submit questions through the chat feature or ask questions feature in the webinar. So feel free to do that throughout the webinar, and then we will answer questions as we go, or towards the end. All right, so we will jump right in and start talking about what is the Florida Pathways Institute. So the Florida Pathways Institute is a statewide guided pathways implementation effort, and the ultimate goal is to increase completion rates across the state. As we all know, completion rates within the community college realm nationwide are pretty low. So guided pathways is a way, as a national movement, to help increase those completion rates. And it's one of the main objectives of the Florida Student Success Center is to work on guided pathways implementation. We are modeling what was done by the American Association of Community Colleges Pathways Project. Some of you may be familiar with that work. 4 of our Florida College System institutions participated in the first cohort of the AACC Pathways Project. So we're going to be doing something similar, but tailoring it to be specific to Florida. So why are we doing this? For a few different reasons. As I mentioned, the low completion rates we tend to see across the nation for community colleges. In Florida, the 3-year graduation rate is around 42%, so not even half. So what can contribute to that is kind of the cafeteria model institutions. Historically, community colleges have been all about access and have done a great job in providing access and lots of options and opportunities for students. However, when we provide too many course options, too many program options, and not really a clear path of how a student can get from entry into completing a credential and graduating, it can be a little confusing for students. And that's something that, is starting to show in the research on pathways. Also, disjointed support services, those isolated interventions, at our colleges, we work on a different initiatives that maybe target subsets of students, and they can be very successful in helping that subset of students, but not really making an impact with the whole student population. So those types of factors can lead to the poor student outcomes that we often see with community college students. So we've been talking about guided pathways, but what exactly is that? It's kind of one of those buzzwords out there that you've probably heard, guided pathways. It's really an institution-wide approach to student success. And really the crux of it is providing a clear roadmap for students from when they show about your institution and enroll, all the way to walking across the stage at graduation and having clear check-in points along the way that are connected to their ultimate career goal. I mentioned earlier, there's lots of initiatives out there that the community college system nationwide has been a part of over the past several years. Guided Pathways is really not an initiative. It's a very comprehensive way for institutions to become student-focused. It touches all aspects of an institution, from onboarding, advising, technology, tracking students, curriculum mapping, holistic student supports, all of that. So it's not something that is going to be done, in a year or two. It's really a culture shift within the institution that requires significant leadership buy-in as well as investment to really make a change at the institution. And now on the screen is the Pathways model. So this is a national model developed by the Community College Research Center and the AACC Pathways Project, and it breaks the Guided Pathways framework down into 4 pillars. So the first one is creating clear curricular pathways for students and really getting them on that path. The second one is helping them choose their pathway and enter that pathway. The third is helping them stay on their path, and the fourth is ensuring that they are learning. And that is to recognize that if we make all these changes for students entering the college, helping them choose their pathway, getting them on the pathway, providing them those supports, if we're not looking at also what's going on in the classroom, which is where students spend the majority of their time and probably the most impactful part of their college experience, then we probably aren't doing enough to increase their success and completion rate. So it's a pretty basic model when you really break it down into its 4 components, but there is a lot of work that goes into each one. So that's what the Florida Student Success Center is going to be focused on over the next couple of years. So how we are going to do that is the Florida Pathways Institute, which is the Florida version of that national pathways model that I mentioned. So we have a cohort of colleges that have signed on to participate in our first cohort of FPI, is what we're calling Florida Pathways Institute. And it is a 2-year cohort and commitment that will include a variety of activities. So right now, the cohort institutions are busy administering the scale of adoption assessment at their campuses. This is a tool that was developed by the Community College Research Center, and it really helps institutions evaluate where they are now in implementing specific practices that are aligned with that guided pathways model that we showed a moment ago. So that's something that they're working on now. When they're finished, it will show kind of a temperature read of where they are and help planning for moving forward. We are also going to have 4 face-to-face meetings that will be hosted by the Student Success Center. The format will be having discussion with national experts that we bring in, peer learning from other colleges that are doing great work in the field, and also a lot of discussion and planning sessions for college teams. We want these to be working meetings, not just coming and listening to speakers, but really diving into the work with the college team. Also part of this for our institutions will be receiving coaching, and that's where the Pathways Navigators come in, and we'll be talking in detail about that in a moment. And then also, of course, receiving technical assistance on support or on implementing guided pathways, and then there is also a data reporting piece through the post-secondary data partnership. So on the screen now is the FPI team that both our cohort institutions and our Pathways Navigators will be working with. This is just to give you, we give the face to the name. So myself, Katora, are both on the call today, and then Dr. Carrie Henderson, who is our Executive Vice Chancellor, will also be very involved in this work. So on the screen now is the institutions that will be participating in the first cohort of FPI. There are 13 of them. We're very excited to have so many institutions, nearly half our system, sign up to participate in this. I think that speaks volumes to the excitement around guided pathways work, and that folks are kind of realizing that this could be really the way to go to increase student success at their institutions. When we first started this, we were hoping to get at least 5, maybe 7 institutions, and then the applications just kept coming in. So we're very excited about that. I did want to point out that if you are currently coming from one of these 13 institutions, you can still apply to be a navigator. We will just assign you to a different college, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later. But even if you're coming from one of these institutions, we definitely welcome you to apply to be one of our Pathways navigators, and we'll talk a little bit more later about the types of folks that we're looking to apply. So this is to give you a high-level overview of what the FPI first cohort will look like, and as navigators would also be participating in. So right now we're in fall 2019, obviously, and I mentioned the colleges are doing their scale of adoption assessment. Moving into the spring and summer, there will likely be, we'll solidify our cohort 1, after institutions do the scale of adoption assessment, they can make their final decision as now is the right time to be moving forward with guided pathways. There will be some pre-work to do, and then starting in fall 2020 is when we'll have the first face-to-face convening. And the topic of that one will be transformation at scale, really building momentum for guided pathways. Then that spring, we'll have the second meeting, which will focus all on program mapping and transfer and mapping that to employment. Then the following fall, we'll be convening 3, which will talk about onboarding and student support. And then the final convening will be in spring of 2022, and that one will focus all on teaching and learning. And I also want to point out that equity will be infused throughout all of the institutes. That's going to be a very important piece of guided pathways. You really can't talk about implementing guided pathways without also addressing equity concerns and closing those achievement gaps. So that's going to be a major focus of the institute as well. And then in between each institute will be pre and post work for our institution. So that was the Florida Pathways Institute in a nutshell. So now we're going to move into talking about the Pathways Navigators, what they are, and what role they will play in the Florida Pathways Institute. So, what are the Pathways Navigators? I'll start out by saying we have 3 currently. So the navigators are Florida College System representatives who have received extensive training on guided pathways implementation and will partner with and support our cohort 1 institutions throughout that 2-year institute process. So we currently have 3, Eileen Stork from Indian River State College, Naima Brown from Santa Fe College, and Sherry Rowland from Tallahassee Community College are our 3 navigators right now. They have already gone through a year-long training through Jobs for the Future and Achieving the Dream on guided pathways implementation. And they will serve, they will be working with our cohort 1 institutions, but they'll also be working with our pathways navigators and kind of serving as a mentor, train the trainer type approach. Each college, to back up a little bit, so we have the 3, but with 13 colleges participating in our Florida Pathways Institute, we definitely will need more support for our colleges. So we're looking to expand our cadre of coaches or pathways navigators, as we're calling them. Each cohort college is going to be assigned an academic and student affairs navigator. We want to make sure that both sides of the house are represented for each cohort institution, as both play a very important role in guided pathways implementation. And we're also going to have subject matter expert navigators who can serve in advisory roles and be deployed to our cohort colleges as needed based on institutional needs. So if we have an institution who really has an interest in diving deep into data and how to use data, we're looking for folks who can serve in that subject matter expert role as well. So why navigators? Why use this structure. So coaching strategies have really been used nationally recently by big organizations like Achieving the Dream, Completion by Design, and AACC. Many of you may have experience with receiving coaching if you're in Achieving the Dream college or something of that nature. But this has been a national model to really further support those transformational student success reforms. So we are seeking to develop our own homegrown leaders who can then go out in the field and help support the institutional change. And navigators are going to benefit, obviously, the institutions that they are coaching, but they'll also be able to bring the training and resources that they obtain through this process back to their home institution. So it's a benefit to the individual, to their assigned institution, but also to their home college. So what exactly are the navigators going to be doing? The main role will be to facilitate and guide discussions at those 4 face-to-face convenings that I referenced earlier. I'm going to talk more in detail in a minute about the specific training that the navigators will receive, but it's definitely going to include, facilitation, leadership development, asking the tough questions, that type of thing. So that's definitely going to be an important role for our navigators and working with the college teams that our Florida Pathways Institute colleges have identified that will be doing the brunt of this work. They will also serve as liaisons between center staff, so Katora, myself, and Dr. Henderson on institutional progress and how things are going with their assigned college. They will serve as the conduit to connect their assigned colleges with the additional resources and information as those needs arise. And it really boils down to serving as a critical friend to support those colleges. So, being kind of that outside source, looking in, asking those tough questions and helping them move the work forward. But I want to emphasize, Achieving the Dream and many of these other organizations use the term coach for this type of work. We decided to use the term navigator as we want to make sure it's clear that the navigators are really serving as a partner and a support, not necessarily coming in and coaching on what, this is what you need to do at your college to implement guided pathways, but really being more as a support to navigate through the guided pathways implementation process. So as a navigator, there are a few expectations that we wanted to go over. One is that you maintain participation over the 2-year period to align with the 2-year cohort period for our participating colleges. We are going to be hosting a 2-day face-to-face training academy. We're looking at doing that in February, and that's going to be a very intensive training on both the leadership development skills and also on guided pathways specifically. That is going to be augmented by a virtual training platform that you all will have access to as navigators. It's also required that you attend those 4 2-day FPI convenings. So starting next fall, there's one each fall, spring, and then fall, spring again. Obviously to actively participate in any virtual meetings and check-ins that we may have, and then engage with the assigned FPI cohort colleges. This is a really great professional development opportunity for college leaders to support broader student success reform throughout the state. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it also is an opportunity to bring some of that information back to their home institutions. And then navigators that complete all of the training, both the face-to-face and the virtual training component, will receive a certificate of completion from the Florida Student Success Center. So you'll have that certificate with you, great to put on your resume, and just a really good learning experience and professional development. So speaking of the 2-day training that will happen most likely in February, we're calling that the Navigator Academy, and it's going to focus on 1 day of leadership development and another day doing a deep dive into guided pathways and implementation. So up on the screen are some of the topics that we will cover. We plan on bringing in state and national experts to talk about these topics. So as I mentioned earlier, facilitating difficult conversations, managing conflict, guided pathways implementation can be met with some resistance up front. You know, it's really shaking things up and changing the culture of your institution. So there can be some bumps along the way that our cohort institutions are going to have to navigate. And so our navigators are there to kind of help support that process and serve as a motivator and also a resource for information and leading that transformational change. And in addition to that, they will receive, as I mentioned, the specific training on guided pathways, including equity, using data, analytics frameworks, tools, and metrics. So it's going to be a very busy and intense 2 days, but a lot of really great information, and again, a really good professional development opportunity for folks in the system. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to this 2-day training, we also will have a virtual training platform that will include some modules that our navigators can go through for more training. So this will start in February, and then we'll have about a 6-month period before the actual institute starts, so plenty of time to get acclimated and comfortable with both the subject matter information, and also we'll have, you know, opportunities to practice that coaching. So who should apply? I mentioned earlier, feel free to apply. Even if your college is participating in FPI, you'll just be assigned to a different college to be their coach, but you'll be able to bring that information back to help with your institution's guided pathway implementation. I also want to stress that there is not a requirement that our navigators, you know, must have worked at an AACC pathways institution. You don't need extensive experience in guided pathways implementation. We're just looking at folks with subject matter expertise in various areas, including but not limited to, as it says on the screen, academic affairs, student affairs, data, institutional research. Folks with some type of experience with those 4 pillars I mentioned in the beginning: the identify the path, help students get on the path, help them stay on the path, and then make sure that they're learning. So that is what we're looking for. And, you know, we're really looking for a well-rounded group with expertise in different areas. Nobody is at the finish line with this work, so don't feel like you need to be a guided pathways expert at all to apply. We will be, as I mentioned, the training program will be pretty intense, but it will be really good. So please feel free to apply if you have an interest. And we're also looking folks from different levels within an institution. So we welcome you all to apply. So some of the other characteristics we're looking for, in addition to those I already mentioned, is a demonstrated knowledge of and commitment to college and student success goals and strategic priorities, especially equity, demonstrated experience as a change agent, experience leading and working with teams. That's going to be a big one. You'll be working directly with each cohort college's core pathways implementation team. Communication and listening skills, and then the last bullet is very important: the strong interpersonal skills, the ability to establish rapport and trust, to ask those powerful probing questions, and, you know, maintain also confidentiality with the information that your colleges are sharing with you. Doing guided pathways implementation really, it requires you to kind of lift up the rug and look what's underneath, and as an institution's navigator, there needs to be that trust there for them to be able to speak openly and honestly about, you know, how things are currently running and how they should be changed to go along with the guided pathways implementation. So then, how to apply? The application is available on our website, flstudentsuccess.org. There is a link to download the Word version of it. It's also included in the handouts for this webinar. The application deadline is November 30th. You can submit it to the Florida Student Success Center email address, which is in the application. And then I wanted to go over quickly what is actually in the application. So there's the basic applicant information, and it's going to ask you to identify your area or areas of expertise. And there's a pretty extensive list there, so you'll just check off where areas you would feel feel comfortable in coaching our institution. And then there are also several narrative responsive questions, and I'll provide those to you now. You'll need to provide a short bio. You'll be asked to share why you think you would be a good navigator. And then you'll be asked to share any relevant examples of facilitation, coaching, and or mentoring experience that you have. And then finally share any examples of your role in student success reforms at your college statewide. So if you've been involved in any of those initiatives, tell us about those. You'll need to confirm that you have the support of your supervisor to be a navigator and, taking some of your time to do this work. And then we'll also ask for a couple of professional references. And then the all-important question, compensation. So navigators will receive a stipend of $500 to cover travel expenses and other associated costs to attend each of the face-to-face events. So that includes the navigator training and then each of the 4 SPI convenings. So it'll be a total of $2,500 over the 2-year period. And that about sums up the overview for the navigators. We're very excited about this opportunity. I should mention we are looking to find about 20 to 30 more. Since we have 13 institutions, we're hoping to pair each of them with 2 navigators and then having the subject matter expertise navigators as well. So we need a pretty big group of individuals interested in doing this work. So we really encourage you to apply. We think this is going to be a really great leadership and professional development opportunity for folks in our system, and we're just really looking forward to diving deep into the training and working with you all and supporting our Cohort 1 institutions. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them and we will answer them.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions. So we have a question about what the time expectations for navigators will be. So if you could just explain that a little bit, I guess, in terms of, maybe week by week, what would be expected of navigators, how much time they should expect to dedicate towards SPI.
Sure. So we really see the major time being spent at those face-to-face convenings. So you'll have the 2 days of training, and then each of those 4 institutes are 2 days. And that's where the majority of the work is going to happen. If you're coming from an ATD institution, you've probably experienced coaches coming and doing site visits. Right now, that's not part of our model. It's going to be primarily concentrated at our convenings. I did mention there's also going to be virtual modules to augment the training, and that's looking like it'll be about 8 hours total over that 6-month period between when we do the face-to-face training and then when the first convening is. There's probably going to be monthly check-ins, with the center, and that would be about an hour a month. So most of the time at those face-to-face meetings with a couple, an hour a month to check in, plus probably around 8-ish hours over that training period between the face-to-face and the first convening.
Okay, and we have a question about the references. Should the references provide letters of recommendation, or do we just want their contact information?
Just their contact information.
Okay. And we'll just pause for a moment to give people a little bit more time to think of questions. We know we give you guys a lot of information.
So we got a question about Part A in the application where it asks to select your primary and secondary areas of expertise. I would say select any that you feel comfortable coaching on, but put a 1 if it's a primary area that you really feel that's one of your main areas of expertise, and put a 2 if you have expertise in that area, but it may not be your number 1. But you can select more than 2 if that makes sense, and then rank each one that you select either as a 1 or a 2.
A question about tentative dates for the convenings. We don't have dates just yet for those convenings, but as soon as we find out tentative dates or those exact dates, we will send that information out to everyone so that you can save the date.
Yeah, and we'll be doing that pretty far in advance. The first one isn't until probably a year from now, so we don't, next fall. But I can tell you for the face-to-face training, that will 90% sure be the last week of February. We're just finalizing the reservations. So you can block off that Tuesday, Wednesday, and the last week of February.
Okay, and then if your college is one of the 13 colleges, are they selecting someone internally or should a person still apply?
If you are coming from one of the 13 colleges, I'm not sure if you're asking if you should go through the Pathways team or if you can, apply on your own. I would say maybe, confer with your supervisor on that and your core Pathways team, whoever is leading the Pathways work for the Florida Pathways Institute. But as I mentioned earlier, we are definitely accepting folks from SCI institutions. So even if you're not maybe part of the core implementation team, you're welcome to apply here.
I think they're asking if that particular college is choosing the navigators or if we would be choosing them.
Oh, we would be choosing them. We'll do, once we get to know everyone and who's applied to be a navigator, what their areas of expertise are, and then we look at the scale of adoption results from our Florida Pathways Institute cohort colleges, will be able to match folks that way.
And even if your college is participating, you still will not get matched to be a navigator at your participating institution.
Correct, because we want it to be, kind of a third-party outside source coming in. All right, we'll give it another minute. If anyone else has any additional questions. All right, seeing as there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thank you for participating. If you think of any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Katora, and we look forward to seeing those applications coming in. Thank you.